talked about your career before, but from, good years, starting at good years, a control systems engineer to day trading to consultant at Deloitte, it's been anything but linear. What's the advantage of being a generalist from a career standpoint?
Certainly wasn't my intent, and actually looking back on it, there's been a consistent theme of information systems in manufacturing all the way through. But I think that the primary advantage has been just, I look at things with a very different perspective, and I'm kind of coming at a problem from lots of different angles. I think the network, and this has been a little surprising to me because I don't consider myself someone that is like wired into lots of people or whatever, but I often find that when I run into certain situations, and there's something will come up in a discussion or a problem that we're having or whatever, and I'll be like, oh, I know a guy, I know someone who can help, I know a company, and I don't think I would have been able to bring a lot of that to the table without that experience.
Yeah, so, branching out a little bit.
Yep.
So is there anything you do that's intentional about, curating or maintaining the network, or is it just kind of natural?
I think I try to just help people.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably because I'm actually terrible at networking. And I don't keep up with my friends from college well enough. I don't keep up with my friends from high school well enough.
Yeah.
But I found that I am always trying to help create opportunity, and that allows for lots of intersections, lots of touch points, and I think that people tend to remember that and tend to want to help in return. I don't know, good karma or whatever. So, but yeah, I maybe now that I'm over 50, I need to be much more actively trying to intentionally create.
I don't know. Seems to be working out for you so far. I think it's what you're doing is working. So you said you feel like it's unfolding. I think that's a key mindset. I remember when I graduated high school, my grandma's husband told me, he's like, the best days of your life are behind you now. I was like, I remember at the time thinking, no, that's
fatal.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think you're right, but I'll have to figure it out. But yeah, he was totally wrong. But that's one thing I admire about you, is it feels like, you're just optimistic about the future. And, how do you keep that mindset, going? Because it can be tough, because you get to these places where it feels like nothing's in your control and so much is happening. But how do you maintain that positive mindset?
Well, first of all, I try not to watch the news. That'll annoy the press. I think probably the majority of it is just when you deal with individuals, I always think about what people are going through at home, or
right.
What, most people are not scheming and, intentionally trying to create frustration or problems, and trying to understand where people are coming from, and thinking about how you can help them with the core issue. And sometimes you can't, but surprisingly, I think you actually find more touch points and more personal ways that you can engage. A lot of times I think about just a lot of health issues or family issues or whatever. The common mentality is don't bring them into work. To me, it's by allowing for some degree of that conversation, it brings the humanity back into what we do, and I think that then allows you to be optimistic because you're really appreciating someone for, what drives them, what motivates them, their kids, what they're going through. And if you can help each other and do a little business on the side, I think that it makes it hard not to be optimistic that way.
Yeah, I love it. Makes a ton of sense to me. So you got into Deloitte consulting, at 30 without the typical background. How did that happen? What was that?
I had left Goodyear, and the stock market had done real well for me, and I'd been working on a expatriate up in Canada, so there are advantages to that, and I thought I was pretty clever. Then the crash occurred, and in that time frame, I had met my wife, and we had 3 kids that we were starting to share raising together, and I realized like it's time for me to go back. And I had explored. I was really interested in high tech, and at the time there was a lot of networking and looking at companies like Nortel, JDS Uniphase, and Intel, going that direction. But I was also particularly interested in the rationale behind why certain decisions happened and why I had experienced some things that didn't really make sense to me as an engineer when working at Goodyear. I had a friend who had just joined Deloitte, and he had lots of good things to say, and it was really conversations with him. At the time, I was living in Canada. He was working in Detroit, and that didn't seem to be a problem for Deloitte that I could cross at the border. And so I just kind of applied, and things worked out. And from there, I got to see some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it's a pretty cool story. That's a long way to go from being a control systems engineer to hit a plant. Yeah.
Talk about feeling like a fish out of water.
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean, you were just, a whole different world, whole different language. And again, it came back to when you focus on that core value, the core of what my background was always automation, controls, information systems. And Deloitte at the time was getting more and more into those areas. Their customers were asking for help in those areas. And so, if I, focused on that and focused on, this is my world, that made it easier, because it would be real easy to be like, whoa,
everything is
stuff
different.
I have no idea.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I think that's, for me, that's where a lot of the big learnings have come, is where I get into that place where it's just like, what am I even doing here?
Every day.
Yeah, right. That, I think it was Jack White, the rocker, there was this really good interview with him on YouTube of him and Conan O'Brien. But it's actually like a serious interview. It's really good. But the part that stuck out the most to me was like, he said, nothing good comes from being comfortable. And every time I'm in one of those situations, it's like, yeah, this kind of sucks in the moment, but I know it's going to stretch me, and I'll be, a little more well-rounded as a human being at the end of the day. So yeah, they can feel uncomfortable, but yeah, there's a huge growth opportunity, I think, on the backside, for sure. So you talk about companies waiting for the perfect digital transformation solution. Like if you think about what you guys at Axiom do, help companies get up to the next level. What's wrong with the mindset that there is a perfect solution, in your opinion?
I think often people are looking for all sorts of good reasons. They're looking for the creation of standards. They're thinking about maintainability. They're thinking about the downstream effect in terms of how you're going to support something. Do they have the resources for it? So there's lots of good reasons for taking time and being very cautious about making sure that what you're building, what you're creating, isn't causing so much disruption.
Right.
It's going to adversely impact you. At the same time, over my somewhat long career at this point, I'm finding less and less that the hope for standardization, the hope for maintainability, the hope for it seems like it's kind of striving for something that actually doesn't occur. And it doesn't occur for lots of reasons. Technology changes. The people you depended on suddenly aren't there anymore. You make some sort of a acquisition or transition of business, and all of a sudden, what you thought was a standard one place is no longer another place. And I think the other thing that's changed is the systems interoperability and the ability to kind of make sense out of diverse sources of information without it being kind of detrimental, an insurmountable barrier. Like
right.
Control system, maybe in the past you had to really, really understand, how to map data out, how, what the conversion process was.
Yep.
With modern tools, that the ability to allow for whatever variable is coming and then adjust it and manipulate it and make sense of it on its way through the information chain.
Right.
It's just a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Not less complex.
Yeah. Right.
It's actually more complex in a lot of ways. But and because of that, you don't really have to be as worried. Certainly not in smaller organizations where you're really not looking at global standards or things like that. But even in large organizations, often the plant runs as an entity on its own.
Yeah.
Or you've got a division.
Exactly.
And trying to do things too broadly, knowing that things are just changing underneath you,
yeah,
I think tends to slow people down.
Yeah.
So
Agreed. Yeah, I think that is a big challenge with the big companies, especially. It is heartening to, in the day and age where a lot of them are getting cut up and spun off. And I think that's one good part of that, is that it's allowing more of that kind of an entrepreneurial spirit to happen within those smaller companies,
Yeah.
where now they can use kind of whatever they want, as opposed to having to get, the sign off of 43 people up top. So
at least in theory.
Yeah.
In practice,
yeah, it's true. People,
I don't see that too often.
that's where optimism's coming in. But,
I think I think it's coming.
yeah.
There was a shift. Everyone was setting up digital transformation, digital growth, digital whatever. And to a degree that makes sense, because you're dealing with technologies that at the time weren't widely understood. But that was 10 years ago. At this point, there's so many proof points. There's so many, you can go online and find help in almost any area.
Yep.
I think that the trend towards more local innovation with a central organization doing more curation or enablement is going to continue. But I do think it's interesting that for the first time in my career, I've seen the ability for the little guy, the small and medium manufacturer, organizations that don't necessarily have large central support teams, to be able to innovate and to be able to affect change much more rapidly. And I think that's a pretty interesting dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. It made me think about the there used to be, a certain stigma against using like Raspberry Pi or something out in the field. Like you'd get some of the old, you'd try to use that or something from even Automation Direct that's not, a Rockwell or a Siemens or whatever. You used to get all this pushback from, the older engineers or, corporate or whatever. Even though it's a perfectly fine solution, it's just not necessarily, the corporate approved solution. I see the same thing. I think there's a little bit more freedom to do things like that. So it's cool.
Yeah. No, I do think that it's creating its own challenges.
Yeah, sure.
It's a little like
Yeah.
At home where you have lots of different wireless networks, you have different brands, 50 different apps on your phone to connect with whatever light switch and, light bulb and fan and whatever else. And I see some of the same thing where there's a propagation of lots of different platforms. The good news is they can all communicate and connect, but if you're not doing a decent job at documenting, it's a little like buying a fully automated house that, you don't know what all apps you're supposed to have. You don't.
Yeah.
And
right.
We could be headed for a little bit of that, but.
Yeah, that's a good point. What are some, you mentioned documentation. Is there anything else that you can think of, or like what kind of stuff would you be documenting in those cases where you're using like these disparate platforms to make something work?
I think even though you may be using an API and it may be communicating in a very natural way, the ability to make changes or, every application functions a little bit differently. And so, I just think back to like, if I go to, one light bulb, Philips Hue versus some, I can't even think of the Casa.
Okay,
is
nice.
a version. They just have two different interfaces, two different configurations.
Sure, yes.
And it's less about figuring them out because there's also been a trend to much more usability. So, industrial systems used to be very, it was kind of arcane. Like you had to be really understand a lot of different terminology, different acronyms, different communication protocols, whatever it might be, and that made it the realm of specialists. I think a lot of the tools that are coming now and being adopted are much more user friendly. They're much more natural language oriented. Hopefully, they allow for more AI participation.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's the so much the arcane wizardry of making sure that kind of stuff is documented, but simply even knowing what the tools are that you're using, where all the apps lie.
Yeah.
In the past, there was application proliferation was a real problem, and that was kind of the rule around IT organizations was trying to reduce the number of applications that they were supporting or they were dealing with. I'm not sure that's necessarily, certainly you don't want unlimited proliferation, but it's a little like your phone. Like if Apple were, mandating that I could only look at so many apps, that would limit the ecosystem, that would limit the innovation, and we wouldn't have all the tools that we have today. Exactly. But finding your way around is still a bit of a, can be a challenge. And then I think also there's also new ways to document. So, it isn't just about putting on paper. It isn't just about, creating a course or whatever, even just micro content videos that say, hey, here's how I did this, here's how I did that. and make those available to the teams that may be dealing with it. That might be enough.
Right.
So,
yeah, I like that minimal essential theme. Just like whatever you have to do to get it,
Yep.
the 80-20 approach. Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing too. If I'm looking down the road, like 10 years, well, just using the home automation analogy, like Apple Home, for instance, it pulls in all the different apps where you don't need like a train app for your HVAC, and you don't need the Philips specific app. You can kind of tie them all together and abstract away the need for all that.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the way we're going, is really focusing on the UI and like getting something that's universally, available.
Yeah.
And everything else kind of ties up into it, where you don't have to get as into the details. You don't have to know where the the MSR is in the Modbus,
Yep.
device you're talking to. So yeah, I think that's going to be the trend. And it's just kind of knowing what's there is going to be the limiting factor.
Yeah. The fact that you're Alexa or Apple, or
Right.
you can expect that to understand what is underneath.
Exactly.
I'm not sure that's quite made it.
Yeah, I don't think it has, but
I think you're right.
I think it will be. So yeah. What is one of the biggest misconceptions about the whole digitalization industry, 4.0, whatever you want to call it? What's one that drives you crazy?
Which one? I think the need to put a label on everything is, to me, probably the thing that just kind of gets to me, because there's a lot of terms and acronyms, and those are necessary at a certain level, but I feel like for the longest time it was almost creating a barrier where people just, there's so much hype, so much, trying to keep track of all these different changes that essentially, may mostly mean the same thing and just be an evolution of, technology, as opposed to some sort of revolution where, everything I was doing 5 minutes ago no longer applies. That to me is probably the thing that is, it just, I find it creates a barrier that doesn't need to be there. And then, just the general hype of stuff. It's, we're, as engineers, as like you just tend to almost naturally not want to be involved in that hype cycle.
Right.
I don't know if it's an engineer thing or an age thing or whatever. So on the one hand, you have to be, in order to get the word out and make sure that, people are embracing these tools that are now available. But on the other hand, there's always a bit of like, it just kind of fundamentally gets at you. And, should I be doing this? I'd rather be, in a panel somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Just call it what it is. There's been so many times that people use that as a crutch.
Yeah.
Uses like, who knows the most, words or alphabet soup. And it's less about, do you actually know what you're talking about, and how can you explain this to someone that can actually use it? Yeah. Can you think of a good example or about a time when a small manufacturer did like the best example of like a digital transformation that you've seen? Was an example of that?
I'm not sure I've ever actually seen what I would think of as a transformation.
Okay.
There are very few companies that I think are fundamentally changing what they're selling or fundamentally changing how they're operating. I think it's much more about a digital evolution. That they have new tools, new efficiencies, new ways. But the the problems they're solving are the same problems they've always been solving. And, under that lens, I've seen a lot of companies that embrace new technology. We're working with one right now, or actually several right now, that are exploring using vision systems not for deep inspection of like quality parts or kind of traditional vision applications. They're using vision to monitor their overall process, see when things are open, closed, parts are coming in, parts are going out, and your ability to move quickly and to, you no longer need to string up wires, make changes in a PLC, fundamentally map the operation. There's a lot that you can kind of iterate on. That's allowing them to learn a lot about their business and learn a lot about first connecting some of the data that they may already have, but also understanding a lot of the gray space between things, between operations that is affecting their business in a pretty material way. So that's kind of neat to see. But again, I think it's more, you're probably more right-minded to go into this looking for evolutionary gains as opposed to, I'm going to, yesterday I was selling metal, today I'm selling data. It happens, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But,
what's an example of an actual transformation you could think of? Is like, what would that look like for a small manufacturer?
I think shifting to something like where the consumption of the product was as much about the data that was being generated. Probably the easiest examples are looking at industries where there's service, aftermarket service, where there's spare parts usage. There, I think being able to bring a whole different perspective, essentially a new offering, new product, that is a true transformation, or it can be a true transformation. But I'm not sure I can think of a whole.
That's an interesting way to think about it. I never really thought about the data being something you would sell to. I mean, it makes sense. That's think about like a lot of the big software companies. Like the thing you buy from them isn't necessarily how they're making their money. They're making their money on getting your data and selling it to someone else. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think there was a big push a few years ago, and a lot of the IoT applications and really the success of IoT was around smart connected products, maybe less so on smart connected operations. I think that was always the hope, but it's also just natural. There's it's easier to change something that's new,
right,
and introduce a new product or a new offering.
Yeah.
One of the things that maybe was underappreciated was when you're bringing something new like that to market, there's change all the way through your system. And so, do your salespeople know how to sell this new thing, this new offering, this, data-enabled package? Does that run contrary to your channel partners? Does it create conflict in your system? The challenges are so much more than just, hey, I've got a great new idea. It's also the ability to iterate, the ability to innovate on the fly. Where you may think it's one thing, but you realize, actually, we shouldn't look for the filler opening. We should actually look at something that's happening just before or just after. And those kinds of changes used to take time. Like if I was going to string up a photo eye or, a proc sensor or whatever, it would, it was obviously, it takes time. It takes bringing the equipment down. You have to wait for, non-production periods. Whereas using a system like that, you can iterate, in a real-time basis. And in a lot of ways, you actually get to involve the front line, the operations that much more.
Right.
Because, it isn't some arcane specialty that you've got to, go off into a secret lab and then come back out with new drawings. And, next thing you know, 3 months have transpired and, no one remembers what they were actually trying to achieve aside from the engineers assigned.
Exactly.
So it's kind of fun when you're able to show people change and then immediately get feedback and immediately make change. And that's not quite right. Let's do it this way. So I think that from a user experience or an operator experience is becoming much more integral to the process.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Anyone that's worked in operations could tell you a story about even like the guys that have been there for 20 years. Like they might know that there's a sensor there, but why they think it's there might be totally off base about what we're actually doing. It's like, there's so many stories of that. But if you have a camera that's actually watching it, it's a totally different story. So
it is interesting to see the reaction, and everyone has stories about, is Big Brother watching me?
Right. Yeah.
There's kind of the obvious things, but there's, I think some of the less obvious, like I have so many examples of where, we're working with these systems and, all of a sudden you've got an operator dancing around in front. Yeah. It just brings a whole different attitude to, to their day.
Yeah.
Now, 20 minutes later or 2 days later or 5, whatever, I'm sure the camera just kind of goes into the background.
Sure.
But
it's cool though.
It's a bit of a, it really does allow for a whole different level of interaction and a whole different level of participation in terms of like who gets involved in the change.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's the best part of the job, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Some of the best, as a new engineer, it's a really good time because you can go in and with fresh eyes and just be like, what do you want to change?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times those guys are used to people saying, that's too big of a change or, we have so many other things to work on. So it's nice to get in there and make those quick, easy wins. And that just sows a lot of goodwill, and it's a good feeling.
Now the trick is how to get those quick wins, but then also instantiate it into a long-term maintainable process. And one example I have is we put in an application like that. A customer was having an issue with 4 different pieces of equipment, 4 cells, and one was behaving strangely. And they were able to use a basic webcam to identify the problem and resolve the problem. And at the time that was done without IT being involved. And
nice.
And fundamentally there was no risk to their operation. The system was completely separated from the business systems or the operation systems. They were just using a camera to help them understand what was going on. The risk of systems like that is you're brought in technology into your environment that maybe isn't connected that day, but may be connected downstream. And is that creating some sort of a security issue? Or is that perpetuating the idea that, these are a bunch of cowboys that are just doing whatever they need to do to make their number and not thinking about the maintainability of a system. So I think there's a give and take that has to happen, but in the end, it's about making production, and it's about if you don't want to stop the operation, you can't be paralyzed, trying to achieve perfection and not able to actually just do what you were there to do, which is make stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's one of the imperatives of any management team in a plant is to just keep the main thing the main thing. It's so easy to get caught up in the little minutia of, did you put in any example that's small? And I think people will have a tendency to go that way because it's comfortable. Like there's rules around small things and you know what to do. And so you kind of gravitate away from, keeping the big picture in front of everybody. But I think that's a super key part of leadership is like, this isn't exactly by the book, but it's going to get us started a couple days sooner. So let's do that and then worry about the rest later. Yeah.
I think that big picture is important though. And recognizing that these tools can have a huge impact into an operation. And ideally they're done well and they're done properly. And often I've seen the flip side where people are looking for a business case, return on investment, and they're justifying a project or a set of actions around a certain business case. And often it's hard to fully appreciate all the different areas that technology will touch and all the different areas of improvement that you're going to realize. And there's a reason that the best companies in the world are, fully networked, fully instrumented, fully engaged in using these tools. There's a reason that their performance is that much better. And you shouldn't go into it with, blank check, let's just go spend whatever on whatever. It should be driven by business rationale, but I think often the justification for projects is too narrowly focused, right? And there's too much attention to like, am I going to be able to cut heads, or am I going to be able to, all of a sudden increase my throughput by whatever? You're going to realize change in so many different levels in so many different ways by laying a good foundation.
Yeah, 100%. A good example of that would be you're putting in a new machine that automates a certain part of your line, and you do an ROI calculation, it's 2 to 3 years, and you're like, maybe that's good. But if you think about it down the line, if you want to automate the rest of the line, the ROI of having something already there in place, is sometimes immeasurable because it's going to make everything else easier if you want to put it in.
Yep.
So there's a lot of factors that play into ROI, tangible and non-tangible, for sure. Here's a big one. What's your take on the aging workforce crisis in manufacturing?
The aging workforce crisis. I feel like I should have a quick answer, pithy answer.
When I think of crisis, I guess to be a little more specific, if you go to any plant, I know a ton of people like this. There's your lead guys are guys that could have retired 2 years ago, but they don't have anyone to replace them. And maybe they want to retire, maybe they don't. But they're there longer than they want to be in some cases.
Yeah.
Because there's not no one there to take their place. No one wants to take their place, I guess that's one crisis. There's others that we could talk about, but that's the one specifically I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think, especially in larger companies, smaller companies, I think you see more flexibility, more, you tend to have environments where they just figure it out. And I wouldn't say that it's not an issue there, but I think this perception that it's an either or, that it can't be an and that you have to stop working at a certain point, or that you have to make a transition and turn the keys over to the next generation. To me, it seems like there's a much more fluid way to do that. And in a lot of ways, technology enables that. What drives me nuts is I see, and I meet people all the time because I travel, and I can't tell you how many people that used to be, in engineering, used to be in operations, who are now driving Uber, Lyft, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that suits their lifestyle. Often what I found is that it wasn't a choice.
Right.
They were exited. And that creates repercussions, a shockwave into the system. It feels like there's a better answer. And actually I would look back to something like ride sharing, where you can remain productive, you can help, and you can still do the thing that maybe you really enjoy, and maybe you want to get the heck out and never come back. But or maybe you think you want to get out, and then you realize 2 years into it that either I'm bored out of my mind or I have to go back. And being able to go back in a way that doesn't force me to go see some alternative that doesn't have anything to do with your skill set, your expertise, to me is a shame. So I hope that there's less of a either or and more of a, that you can allow for a transition to happen, and a transition is going to happen. Right. But it doesn't need to be as sharp as it is often.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think there's, two sides of that coin is, people that want to retire can't because there's no replacement. And then the other is what you're talking about here, where people are retired and they don't want to, and they still have a lot left to give. I think those are two equally. Yeah.
It's interesting. We have a customer where there's an individual that is like that, that's bordering on retirement. And I think the other thing that is happening is it's because it feels so dramatic, that individual is not given the incentive to continue to change and continue to think about the system that is being left behind as a living, breathing organism that should evolve. And so he's not researching new things. He's not necessarily as open-minded as we or customer management would like. But a lot of that is driven by this idea that it's a sharp transition, that it's just, you flip the switch and he's gone.
Right.
If he were encouraged to, do a more gradual transition, he would probably be a lot more open-minded in terms of the solutions that he's thinking about, his willingness to engage. So I think that there's obviously the, all of the obvious issue, obvious, too many obviouses. There's the readily apparent issues, but I think there's the more subtle issues that there's innovation capability that's potentially being locked away by them not participating in the go forward solution.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, there's a huge issue there to solve. And it feels like we're kind of heading in that direction. It feels different than it used to. So I think there's positive movement there.
I think there is a fundamental, the pay in manufacturing. There are some systemic issues that are also, why would I go in and do something that is hard, and when I can
Exactly.
Sit behind the wheel in my Uber car and, make 70-80% of what I might make in a factory. So that, I think, there's also the issue of supply and demand. The market forces will work, and
Right.
if we don't incentivize in the right way, they will go elsewhere. Same thing with teachers and nurses and whatever else. So.
Yeah, I'll harp on that as to anyone that will listen. I was just talking to someone the other day in the tire shop about this. It was an older guy that had retired, and he went back to work, and was talking to me about how he couldn't find anyone to work in his fabrication shop. And yeah, I was like, everything's about incentives. I think every company should have a chief incentives officer, and I think incentives should be personalized as much as possible about getting the people the incentives they need to do their job, because that's why, at the end of the day, that's the biggest driver you can find. It's, so, and pay's the big one. So pay people more. It's not rocket science. You could definitely, for just the amount that you pay to hire someone, it's 2 to 3x.
That has a real, when you think about it, it's not just, every transition costs.
Yeah.
Every time you lose a person, you think about the amount that it takes to transition them out, transition someone back in.
Yep.
Perhaps you're paying a recruiter to help with things. Like, there's all sorts of burden for those transitions. And I think that's obvious, but I would say in manufacturing, where there is, the silver tsunami, the graying of America, whatever you want to call it, where it's a known issue and where it's such a priority for us going forward to rebuild the manufacturing base, that confronting that head on, I think is really important.
Agreed. I mean, this isn't a great example because of extenuating circumstances. When I was an operations manager, it was right in the middle of COVID. Most of the top DCS technicians, the guys running the panels, were out. Like 80% were out with COVID.
Yeah.
And there was 2 or 3 guys, that could run it. And luckily they were good with overtime, but I went above and beyond what the procedures said I could, pay wise. I mean, I was doing like 3x overtime for guys that had been there weeks, obviously we did as much as we could to obey the OSHA limits, but just like for guys that are willing to do that, it's like, why not pay them as much as you can to do what they need to do? Just doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I think that's a super key.
I do think the COVID experience, first of all, it stayed with us, and the change that really started there has just continued. It was shocking how many places I'd go into and you'd see half-finished projects. You'd see things that had been started and not continued. And you ask, especially they were thinking about like putting in a digital system to monitor their overall production,
right,
add visibility, whatever it might be. And the answer was, well, that person's no longer with us. And often that person is really no longer with us.
Yeah.
But that's an extreme, but it's still happening from a standpoint of people leaving the business. And, again, back to the cost of transition, the cost of, it's not just about that person and, the act of bringing in someone new, the act of training them up, but there's, initiatives that were underway. There's all that resident knowledge that's, that is in that person that is not necessarily carrying forward. And I'm guessing some of those places, there's still systems that aren't finished, projects that aren't started, that could have been started or should be continued. And if the mechanisms were in place, they would.
Yeah. agreed. I still get calls from companies I was at 5 or 6 years ago, every once in a while, about stuff that I was working on during that time.
Yeah.
It's hardly the exception, I think.
But it drives you nuts when you see, you hear about there's a people crisis. You hear about, we have customers that are, their employee turnover is extremely high. Some of them you probably self-inflicted. Some of them it's just nature of the market. And then I also see, all these people that are over 50 that are wound up, on the wrong side of a reduction in force. And it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
It doesn't equate.
Make it make sense. Yeah.
You need people, and yet
You're getting rid of
also
people.
getting rid of people. Like, come on.
Exactly. And most of the time, in my experience, the reduction in force is related to salary. If they can get rid of a $130K a year guy for college graduate at $70K, they're going to do it. At the end of the day, like that's a delta that you could make up somewhere else.
Yeah.
That, and you're losing 30 years of experience. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
And when you think about that, younger employee probably is going to keep moving.
Exactly.
And
there's no incentive for them to stay.
So you may have saved a little bit of money, but then you're paying a recruiter, and it's like, was it really worth it?
Back. I'll jump right back in. So what excites you the most about the future of manufacturing?
Wow. I don't think we've seen an area of, or a field of opportunity like this, certainly since I've been in manufacturing. I happen to enjoy, I love making things, I love helping people make things. But the ability to bring new ideas, new technologies, new processes, the ability to, just the idea that you have almost a, whether you think, AI is here, whether it's coming, the idea that there is a new participant in the room, that can, a new set of resources that can be applied to the problems that you're facing, I think is just fundamentally, how can it not be exciting? It's, I think, the ability, because there is so much change needed and so much, bringing reshoring of manufacturing is leading to so many areas of opportunity. I think that is, it's just going to create a lot of collisions, a lot of intersections that are going to naturally produce new ideas, new content, new businesses, maybe new business models. We'll see if transformation actually happens. Right. I think this is I wouldn't say it's the place to be for everyone, but to me, as an engineer, as a, someone who likes to solve problems, do it yourself kind of, I think this is just a great space to be in.
Yeah, 100% agree. I feel the same excitement. It's even on the AI side, I think that's going to extend to hardware pretty soon. You hear about any of the people like the NVIDIA CEO, Jensen Huang, he talks about anything that moves is going to be roboticized at some point. So, I think that's exciting. I don't share the pessimism that it's going to take away everyone's job and it's, all doom and gloom. I think it's a good thing. Like anyone that's been in a plant, I think can see that there's not going to be any mass takeover of robots in a manufacturing facility anytime soon. I'm excited for what it's going to do, and the more skilled jobs it's going to bring.
It's been interesting. Over the last few years, I've seen a real change in attitude towards technology. So on the shop floor, 10 years ago, robots, vision systems, there could be an allergic reaction.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sure in certain places there still are, but for the most part, I don't see that happening. They even, union environments where people are embracing the idea of cameras, the idea of robots, it helps their job. It helps improve. It's a new set of tools,
Right.
and and the demand for manufacturing talent is so overwhelming. I don't think there's any risk to, it. If you used to do one thing and that's gone and you can do something else, like, why wouldn't you? So,
Yeah, I think the only people that should be worried are the ones that aren't willing to learn anything new.
yes.
Yeah. When I was working at Symbotic, it was in Georgia. I think I may have told you this story, but my boss, the first day on the job, he's like, you guys need to go to lunch together. And he's like, you need to leave together. It's because Walmart had come to them and is like, these guys do not like you being here. Because we were automating parts of the warehouse. And we would come in the next day and find like people would park fork trucks in front of panels. We couldn't get to them. Or like physically run through panels with a fork. Like we saw that once. But it was just the people that thought that we were taking their jobs. And when the reality is there was just as many jobs being created, that they're just higher skilled. You just have to learn how to maintain the stuff we were putting in as opposed to driving a fork truck,
Yeah.
And, if I think it applies to so many other industries, but especially in manufacturing, if you're willing to learn, like there's always going to be something to do. Yeah, for sure.
I think something else that I find, so I recently got to travel to Taiwan.
Okay.
And it was the embracing of tools like artificial intelligence was so pervasive. But it wasn't a thing. It was just a foregone conclusion.
Just another tool.
They just,
Yeah.
There was no talk of resistance and I'm sure it's there at some level, but from a business standpoint, the people that I was interacting with, and, that's a limited subset, that was just something that was an enabler that was going to make their lives better. And when you think about that, your competition is like that. They're embracing as fast as possible. There is no resistance. It's how can we integrate it? How can we do better with it? What can we do to innovate? I think that's important for U.S. manufacturers to think about, that, your competition is not thinking in the same way that maybe you are.
Right.
And that sounds abstract. But with the pace of change and the pace of transition in this, from a manufacturing standpoint, I think it's very important to realize that this could really impact you directly.
Yeah.
And it isn't so much, again, it's not either or.
Right.
These technologies are here, and they drive value if they're used. And so it's a question of how do you embrace them, not a question of whether you embrace them.
Yeah. Great point. My next question was, if you could change one thing about how manufacturing approaches innovation, what would it be? But I think maybe a better question is, if you had to make that change within one company, if you had full power to go top to bottom and be like, we got to make changes quick, and here's the stuff you need to do to make sure that you can, how would you do that?
I would start on the front line.
Yeah.
And I would start with the mindset of, I've got a whole world of tools that I could bring to the table. And what can we do to make your job better? What can we do to to fundamentally make a difference in your experience as the person adding value to the product. I think getting out of the conference room, getting out of, wherever those discussions often are happening, and having those discussions on the floor and making change, you're going to more directly affect, the closer you are to where that value creation is happening, the more likely that you're actually going to impact that value creation. Right. But you're also building an army of collaborators, right? And often they know the process best. They are, I also think that it's a little like Kaizen, like you want to bring in people from all different aspects of the operation that may be impacted or that may be able to create value. Everyone should be in the room having those conversations. The front desk person that greets the customer probably has some ideas that, what they hear, what they feel, what tools they could use to help them serve. I think, the accountants, I think, every element should be involved in that adoption of new technology. And it's really, I think the Kaizen approach is the right approach. Find a problem, bring the right resources to the table, make change, measure the change, continue to improve, but allow for digital enablement in that process. Have all the right tools at the table. It's a little like when the EMTs show up and you may have something going on, you may have a good idea of what you think the problem is, but you would never tell them, oh no, I don't need that test, or I don't need you to do that thing. You just let them do what they do. Yeah. And perhaps you will come to the same conclusion and they will rush you to the hospital and fix you. Perhaps they will determine some other issue. Either way, by the time they arrive, they've accumulated a whole set of data that now, when it's in the hands of the medical staff, they can help you do what you're going to do. I think very similar.
And just do something. Yeah, like that's the key.
Just do it.
Right. Yeah, I think not doing that exact thing is how we get to the place where people shut down and don't provide any more feedback. I'll think of an example when I first started as a manager in one plant. This guy came up to me and he's like, hey, I've had this, it was basically like an afterthought. He was kind of venting about something else. He's like, I've had this idea for a couple of years. He's like, but no one wants to try it. Yeah. And so I was like, he's like, all it would take is just a TA to do it, like a test authorization. I'm like, well, let's do it right now. So we went to my office, like, write that. He's like, oh, you want to do it right now? I'm like, yeah. So I went and signed it and we tried it. And he became it was like a light switch trip in that guy. Yeah. Like he was a 20-year guy. Like after that, he was plugged in, it's like just one little thing like that can make a huge difference. Yeah. You listen to somebody, and it wasn't a big change we did either. It was something very minute, but it makes a difference.
I think a lot of times it does come back to that return on investment and, project justifications. And there's always, 20 things that never make it above the line. Yeah. That very likely could have had a profound impact on either engagement of the workforce or made small differences that accumulate and make things better. And that comes back to, how you measure ROI in an environment where there's the scarcity of resources, the ability to have, essentially a network effect where one change affects another thing, which affects another thing. And all of a sudden you discover that this is actually a characteristic that, customers appreciate and buy more of or whatever. I think rethinking how ROI is done can help with that. But I think that it's much simpler to just go in with the attitude that you had, which is let's just trust your eyes, just engage. Yeah. You can create a big formula and or you just you do stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. What's a controversial opinion you have about manufacturing or, the manufacturing business world in general? Something that people might be a widely held belief that you just don't jive with.
Hmm. I think what one is the mindset of transformation versus evolution. I think that a lot of these changes don't have to be as big or as invasive. I think that mindset that you're doing something so different it limits the ability to actually affect change. Every time I read digital transformation, it gets under my skin. It really does. And and I know it's useful to be able to put an umbrella concept like that so that everyone knows what you're talking about. Even something Industry 4.0, IIoT, whatever you want to call it. I think the other piece that may be a little controversial on both sides is that transformation from a technology standpoint should be integrated with continuous improvement. And so often I see environments where the continuous improvement organization and the digital, whatever you want to call it, organization are two different organizations.
Yeah.
And that just is kind of stuns me that you can think like that in the end, if you have, and maybe that comes back to, if you're calling it transformation, well, that feels different. If it's evolution, it's fundamentally continuous improvement. And these tools really should just be part of the toolkit that they bring.
Yeah.
And there's already a change management process. I hear often that the biggest limiters to any of these initiatives are either senior management support, organizational alignment, or that change management didn't happen. And yet there's almost always a change management process in existence in a company. And I can't tell you how many times that I've gone in and it's treated as a project or it's treated as a separate initiative, as opposed to embracing the continuous improvement methodologies and practices that are already there.
Yeah.
That just doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't make sense. If you think about it from like a gym analogy, if you go through a transformation to be more fit, it's not like you work out a certain amount, you eat a certain amount, and then you're just fit. It's like you have to change the way you live forever if you want to maintain and change anything about yourself. So yeah, that's Industry 4.0 is definitely no exception to that rule, I don't think either. I mean, that's how you get the big expensive machines that people buy and then never use.
Yeah.
Or softwares or whatever. What it's a bit of a segue, but is there a certain failure that you've had? It doesn't have to be a failure per se, but something that maybe didn't go the way you thought it did, but taught you something valuable over the course of your career. Any particular ones stick out?
Ask my wife. Particular failures. I think, I've had lots and lots of things that I would consider failures, or maybe just didn't get to see something all the way through to fruition.
Right.
And often because most of my career, as I look back, I've always been a bit of a innovator, change agent, whatever buzzword you want to call it, you're often at the intersection of uncomfortable and improvement. And there's just naturally you look back on things and think, I could have done this differently. I could have done this better. I could have driven improvement in a different way. I think in hindsight, you always look back and think you've made major changes, major improvements. You wonder why sometimes it has to be so hard. And often, there are pieces that you just want to, you'd love to go back and be able to finish, or, hey, I found a new way to do something.
Yeah.
And then the other one that especially in our current business, where we're very focused on small mid-market manufacturers. Obviously we do work with large manufacturers as well, but in your heart that you can affect positively so many businesses, that you can affect people's lives and make that just a little bit better. Kind of like you described that one person that, went from being kind of crotchety and I've brought that up and that, no one listens to me, to all of a sudden that person's lit up and engaged. Reaching the small and mid-market is incredibly hard. And, or at least we've found it hard. And I think a lot of organizations we work with, at the state level and the federal level, organizations that are trying to help small manufacturers. And often what you find is, it's the same voices, the same examples, the same, I think about how many, like as I'm driving down the highway, how many warehouse looking buildings, how many manufacturers that you pass by that, I could make an improvement. I could do something that would make them better. And, or we could do something, we could do something to improve.
Yeah.
And you really have no way, barring going door to door. And, that probably works in some cases, but how to reach manufacturers that at scale that need the kinds of tools and the kinds of capabilities that I think we could help set them on the journey in the right way. I view that as a failure. Like, I will never be done at that.
Yeah. I can feel the passion about that from you. So I think you're definitely in the right spot as far as what you're trying to do. I think it's going to happen eventually. So it's cool. What advice would you give to, it could be your younger self or someone that might be graduating with a double E degree or mechanical engineering degree, getting ready to go into manufacturing, like a Goodyear or something like that, or even smaller company? Is there any advice that you would give to them starting out today?
It was interesting. I got almost the same question from a young engineer. He's been in the business for, several years, but he was asking, how have you gotten to where you are? How have you been successful, and how have you seem to have a good dialogue going on with other, senior leaders or people that own businesses. My answer to him was kind of the same, which is coming into this industry. First of all, you can't come in thinking you know everything, because you don't. But your ability to make improvements are almost unlimited. And if you want something, be relentless at going after it. Don't be afraid. Tap into as many resources as possible and listen. Like, go talk to the people that are running the process, that have been doing the work. And just like you found with, as you listen and you help unlock some of the latent talent that is out there, or latent innovation that is out there. I think that's probably the most important piece, is being willing to listen and being willing to then act and do based on what you heard. Certainly you want to do things with a plan, but at the same time, I think just taking action is often, don't get paralyzed looking for perfection. Just make some improvement and then make another improvement, take a step forward, and the path just kind of opens up for you.
Yeah.
So
great advice. Really good. Think about 2 co-ops that I had, and one was like the best one I ever had, and one was the worst I ever had. The one that was best, she was just she was not afraid to go talk to the operators or go walk in the field and just figure out, she wasn't afraid to ask dumb questions, and at the end of her term, like, everybody loved her. Like, all the operators were like, she came in the room, they were more than happy to talk to her about anything that she was going to ask them to do. And the worst one I ever had was, I would be trying to describe something and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about." But he obviously had no idea. And, it became clear very soon but he would like never go out in the field. He would just act like he knew everything, but didn't know anything. And like, just 2 polar opposites. But yeah, it's super, super good advice. Yeah.
I think the ability to learn asynchronously, like to be able to go hit YouTube, find out about something, to be able to, the amount of resources that people bring to bear to work is really staggering. And the embracing those different perspectives, and not being afraid to look at outside of your business. One tendency that I've seen historically in manufacturing is to want to keep your processes inside, wanting, like, this is our secret sauce. And I think perhaps the next generation, like the willingness to that it's really the journey that you're on that's the secret sauce, not necessarily this thing that you think may be static or part of your business IP.
Right.
Certainly IP is important, but willingness to look outside is something that I think is different now than it was back when I started.
Yeah. Early on in my career, one of the biggest points of friction for me, it was like, we can't be the first plant in the world to ever do this. So why on earth are we re-engineering it? Why are we spending all this time trying to figure out how to do this? There's got to be the probability is non-zero that someone else has already done this. Yeah, it's just, I agree. I hope that we're going towards a world that's more willing to share those things. I mean, because at the end of the day, like, I always used to joke, is like, if you want to, the best way to sabotage our competition is to give them everything that we do, right? So I'm optimistic about that too. I think we're going towards a better place.
The other day we ran an event that we're calling office hours. It's a little like when you're at school and you just bring problems, bring questions. Maybe you didn't understand something from the lesson.
Right.
Maybe you're just getting, hearing what other students are going through, and it helps you absorb the knowledge. So we ran one of those sessions, and we had multiple customers, different industries, different types, all in this case, thinking about a common challenge, which in their case was their energy use, energy consumption, and how that can be related back to smart manufacturing. But the most interesting part was just how open, how collaborative, how they started asking questions of each other, and
Yeah, it's awesome.
and they're all on different points in their journey, and so being able to, they're at different points in their journey, and to be able to learn from each other, I think just creating those opportunities for collaboration in a much less, of course, everyone goes to trade shows or goes to where you're kind of putting on a show.
Right.
I found that so much more valuable to just listen, to learn, to understand, and even as a service provider, technology provider, there were also things that we heard that we realized they were actually affecting our business in a way that, just different perspective again. So I think that the willingness to collaborate and the need to collaborate is that much greater, and pretty an exciting opportunity for those who embrace it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the future is just community and events. I think that's, no matter how you do it, online, in person, I think being able to create a space like that for people in this field is, it's definitely been underserved in the past, but I think anyone that goes into that intentionally, I think there's big wins.
Well, I think the point that a lot of the conversations are happening among the LinkedIn community, among the technology providers, among certainly the larger companies, but so many of the people that we're trying to reach aren't spending their day on LinkedIn.
Right.
They aren't going to these conferences. They aren't having these conversations on, Stack Overflow or, GitHub, repos, looking at some sort of new and, fancy idea that has been proposed. So, I think the real challenge, the real opportunity for us is cracking that code on how to reach. Don't want to say the average manufacturer, but the person that is just out there trying to do the best they can, make stuff the best way possible, is probably not sitting on LinkedIn, listening to a bunch of people have conversations about buzzwords that they can't probably understand. So I think that is, finding cross-platform ways to create those conversations and creating the examples to help people understand that it's not that hard to do. Certainly it's hard to do right.
Right.
And certainly it's hard to do in a way that's lasting. But to just get going, there's no reason not to get going.
Right.
So,
yeah, great answer. I know one place they are is Facebook. You go to any plant and they're all on Facebook. I think when I was working at DuPont, they said at the Washington Works site, which was the biggest in the world at that point, they're like the most used resource on site. The IT team said it was Facebook.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It is an interesting problem because I've been talking to another guy, and he's like, the only people on LinkedIn are just sales guys. Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's most of them. Yeah. Have you guys looked into this is not really part of the interview, but the like McMaster cars and the Swage locks, people that are in the plants all the time selling just stuff. I wonder if there's any partnerships to be had.
Manufacturing is going through a transition, and people are buying and selling businesses. The private equity is coming in, and there's it's just the nature of there's an aging workforce that owned a bunch of businesses that are now being transitioned. And it's during those transitions that there's an incredible amount of resources available. When you think about, buying a business, the financing of that business, changing of processes, new people, new ideas, making sure that you're bringing out the best of the old ideas that maybe couldn't materialize under the original leadership. And I think there's a real opportunity for during business transition that may not be being capitalized on. Certainly, like as a operations technology and consulting organization, we're not necessarily in the room the way Deloitte and their M&A practice is, or some of these, more niche boutique or mid-market or smaller organizations that are helping with transitions. And I think there's a real opportunity to insert evolution of manufacturing into those conversations. Sorry, I'm so resistant to saying digital transformation.
Yeah, I get it.
But to inserting those at the right point prior to, we have to wait for another capital cycle, or we have to put that on an operating budget. Next thing do I want to fix the roof, or do I want to put that system in? There's a point at which, the right level of focus, the right funding, the right alignment around there is a transition happening one way or another, and therefore let's do it right. I think that that's a real opportunity that we're practitioners like ourselves. I do not see being embracing or engaging in the way that I think we could be.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity. It's like being partnering with a real estate agent. If you're a, photographer or something, you just be there when they need you.
Yep.
And have those partnerships ready. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I think certainly this the change in administration is leading to a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be all sorts of response to those unknowns. Some are, full steam ahead, embracing things. Some are, holding back and trying to assess, what the potential implications are. Certainly things like tariffs coming in. There's lots that could be happening, but the overarching theme is we will be producing more here.
Right.
We will be putting more emphasis on the manufacturing base. And I think that if there is no better place to be in at this point in time, whichever side you happen to lean on, I think that is going to present opportunity going forward. I think what I hope doesn't happen is part of what we saw last year, which was a hesitancy to do anything. There was, worry that the change in administration was going to somehow affect a company in one way or the other.
Right.
The other thing that I think is maybe a little quieter, obviously everyone's talking about AI, but the ability to remove people from the workforce, thinking that, maybe with AI, I'll need less of X, whatever, the X might be, operators, people in supply chain, drivers, whatever it might be. And I think that hesitation, obviously some of it is healthy and good for business to manage your risk, but the overarching theme is manufacturing is getting stronger. And I think it's back to those that are bold, those that are assertive, those that, if you're making a good product and you are treating your people well and you're embracing that things are going to keep going, I think the ability to respond and react is going to be there. And I hope that people don't hesitate and create 6 months of delay or pause or worry and lose that time, because I don't think that our competition is doing that. Our competition is embracing one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
good answer. Great question. Yeah. Awesome.
All right.